Hey everyone, I'm Rochelle Moses, and I'm a relationship coach helping people build and rebuild healthy relationships with themselves and others. This past weekend, my boyfriend Corey and I celebrated our 10-year anniversary. So we sat down and talked about 10 different things that have made our relationship strong and healthy from day one. So here are 10 non traditional pieces of advice that can help you build a healthy and strong relationship with your partner. Okay, so the first thing is that most of our decisions were practical rather than romantic.
Yeah, so we moved in. How long we're dating? Like
Like a month.
a month
Yeah.
maybe. And it wasn't like oh my god, I'm deeply in love with you. I'm gonna spend the rest of my life with you. It was more of a I'm paying like 600 a month in rent to live in a decent area. You're paying 600 a month in rent to live
In
in
a
a shady
shitty
area.
area.
Yeah. So it was like, why don't you just move in with me and we'll just split rent?
Yeah.
That was as far as the decision went of like, I can tolerate you and this will help us both save money.
Yeah, because our relationship was still brand new. We were still learning and getting to know each other, but also how we worked as a couple. But it just made sense. Like, you were stressed that I had, drunk guys sleeping on my apartment building stairs and living next to a gas station right off of campus, and it just wasn't a good space. And I think I was at your apartment more than I was at mine anyways. And it just made more sense.
Yeah.
And with this one was kind of like tricky for some people to understand, but we also have always, like, this entire 10 years, we've been under the mindset of, if one of us is ever just not feeling it anymore, like if we ever just start to not be as in love anymore, we aren't really invested in this relationship anymore, then both of us are just okay. That's fine. If you don't want to be in it, then I don't want to force you to be in it. So we're just gonna call it. We're just gonna end it.
Well, I think like a lot of people start with this like overly romanticized view of things. And then a lot of times they get almost too far into a relationship and they're just like, shit, we don't have like a practical foundation. Like either maybe we're not compatible, maybe, there are some things that are sort of make or break. What we did was we started with the practical of let's move in together, let's see how things go. There's no obligation, there's no like, oh, we've been together 5 years, and then we realize there's this big thing of just like, let's move in together and see what happens. And then over time, that romanticism, that depth of relationship and passion and things, that developed over time because we had such a solid foundation, because we knew we were compatible. We knew, things worked with us because we allowed that practical foundation to be built in the first place without all of the the romanticism or the pressure of it of to be compatible. And I think that created almost like this psychologically safe environment of like, oh, okay, like I know I work with this person, but do I want to actually continue being with this person? That I think is one of the reasons that really helped us early on. Because like I see a lot of people, they're like, oh, let's, we're madly in love and this and that, whatever. And then they continue down that route, but they don't live together. They don't really see how compatible they are. They don't really have, certain, hard conversations and things. And it's like, well, shit, we've been together 3 years. We've been together 8 years. We have a mortgage or we have this or we have that. And it's like, well, you got to lay that practical foundation first, I think, because then everything else on top of it will be much more structurally sound.
I also think, like, when people try to focus too much on romantic aspects of their relationship, it like almost puts this unrealistic fantasy, I'm not living in reality expectation on the relationship. And then you're not, like, kind of like you said, like, it's not raw. Like, you're not actually getting to know the person. You're trying to force a perspective of the relationship into what you think it should be because it's what, Disney romanticism taught you it should be.
Well, so the way a lot of so like in media, right? Like the typical story is boy meets girl, boy chases girl, boy catches girl, boy and girl live happily ever after. But it's like, what the fuck does happily ever after actually look like? What does that mean? And that's why you don't see sequels. You don't see a lot of this because it's just like you're taught to chase that puppy dog love, like romantic phase where everything is special and brand new and shiny and exciting, which is awesome. But we're never taught like, okay, but how do I sustain a what does a healthy relationship look like? But two, how do I sustain one over the long term? And that's where all that practical stuff really comes
Yeah,
in.
like what does day to day look like with this person? And moving in right away might not work for everybody, and I'm not saying it should work for everybody, but it definitely worked for us because it allowed us to see each other in our day to day, how we just go about normal, everyday, mundane things, how we handle every task that we have to do. And it just laid everything out right up front.
That, but I also think that, we both had, you know, previous relationships, and it's really easy to be like, oh, I really like this person when I don't live with them. Like, oh, we've been together 6 months or a year. And then you have, almost like the sunk cost,
Mm-hmm.
fallacy of a relationship. And then you move in, you're just like, fuck, this person is awful to deal with. Or like they've got all these really terrible habits, or, their feet really fucking stink and all their shoes reek. So like now the whole house just smells like a locker room or like something way worse. Like I've literally had that happen before where it's like, you're a decent person when I don't live with you. But as soon as we move in together, it's just like living with you is like living in a locker room because you fucking smell so much and it's just you're blind to it, right? I think what we did was just like, oh, here's a quirk. Let's see if we can negotiate around it.
Yeah.
Or here's the thing, can I accept it? Can I not? Like, let's just go ahead and get all this out there in the open so that we can both move forward because we're intentionally choosing to move forward, not because we feel pressure to move forward because we've already been together too long.
Number two is that we are each other's best friends, hands down, no question asked. And I think that comes from like this idea that, so many people think that your partner, you should have a close relationship with them, but they shouldn't necessarily be your best friend. Your best friend should be someone outside of your relationship. But in our case, and in my mind, how it should be is that if this is the person I'm going to choose to be with day in and day out, and that I'm going to spend the majority of my time with, and that they are going to be the other person in the safe space of my home, they damn well better be my best friend.
Yeah, like I think there's almost like this weird separation a lot of times we see again in depictions and or even like religious beliefs or certain other like more conservative traditional relationship dynamics. There tends to be like this separation, right? Of like this is your role, this is your duty, and because this is your duty as a woman, this is my duty as a man. There has to be the separation. There are certain, I can't talk around you certain ways versus my guy friends, right? Because you're too delicate of a fucking flower or some shit. And like
You're a lady, you can't talk about farts.
exactly, and like or I can't cuss friends, right? And like we've been in situations like this before where like we'll be hanging out with like my friends, quote unquote my friends, and one of them will be a guy, and he'll start to say something, and he'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Rochelle." And it's just like that is emblematic of how a lot of relationship dynamics are. It's like I can't be a guy around my
Yeah,
girlfriend.
locker room talk can't happen in front of your partner.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like, I my friends and I, we can be very crude, but almost in like an ironic kind of way.
Yeah.
But it's also like I am just as crude with you privately.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of these things where like it's about authenticity, right? I have to feel like I can be myself to fully show up somewhere. So if I am in a relationship with a person that I do not feel I can be authentically myself, that I don't feel that they fully accept who I am,
Mm-hmm.
that I have to either put on a mask or, sort of curb certain aspects of who I am, that will really affect how fully I can show up in a relationship versus if I know I can fully be me, I can share my fucked up humor,
I could
I
be
can
silly, I could be weird.
exactly like I can cuss, I can do whatever. And not only do you tolerate it, but you appreciate or even celebrate it sometimes. That invites me to fully be myself and to give everything I have to the relationship. And that is a foundation of a deep relationship, friendship, any kind of relationship, right? Is about, it's about respect and trust and communication and things. And if you don't feel like you can trust the person, if you don't feel that they respect you, if you don't feel like you can safely communicate who you are and aspects of yourself, that's not a solid relationship.
And like, I have very good friends outside of this relationship, right? And I'm not saying that like I don't have friends at all, but your best friend is, the person you want to tell everything to first, is the person you want to go celebrate with. And like, I almost feel like if you categorize your partner and your best friend as two separate people, then you're almost like pitting them against each other. And it's like, okay, well, now who do I go to first? Who do I talk to first? Who do I tell this good news to first? Who do I go to for help first?
Well, it's also like if you live with somebody and you spend the majority of your time with that, because like we both also work from home,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like,
We're
which
together almost 24/7.
in it, but in like hopefully a not codependent
Yeah,
way,
for
right? Like
sure.
we're very aware of like codependency and things like that. Like it's hard to have a long-term committed relationship where you're with each other all the time and there not be an element of, oh, that person's well-being does influence my own. But it's like I'm fine to be in a good mood even if you're not in a good mood,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, so we're not codependent in that respect of like your well-being dictates my well-being. It's just it influences, right? As it should in a
Yeah.
healthy relationship, right? I lost my fucking point. Go ahead. I had
I
something
was
else.
I was saying that you're like categorizing your best friend and your partner as two different people kind of pits those two people against each other.
Yeah, like if you live with somebody long term and you're spending the majority of your time with them and you don't consider them your best friend, what is going on?
Yeah, there's a breakdown somewhere.
Yeah, because like I have other incredibly good friends, and we both talked about this the other day of like we both have friends that we've been friends with longer than we've been together,
Yeah.
and that is completely okay. But it's like at the end of the day, I don't live with those people, and I'm not around them virtually 24/7. So if it was like, oh, this chick I live with and I've lived with for a decade, like she's cool and all, but this is my best friend because of what it's just like, you know,
Then what
my
am I doing over here?
one is just like, I've got friends that like, if you got to bury a body, like these are motherfuckers I call, right? But it's also like they're living their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
They've got families. We've all moved to different parts of the country and things. It's like we do talk almost every day, but I'm not with them all day every
And
day.
your decisions don't necessarily impact their life at all. Like,
Correct. Correct. 100%.
all right, number 3 is that we don't really share material things. Like, we don't have two of everything, obviously. Like, we only have one coffee maker, but you have your coffee mugs, I have my coffee mugs. You have your books, I have my books. We do have multiple copies of some books just because I don't want to read your books because I'm a little bit rougher with my books. You like them to stay a little bit more pristine. But so, like, basically, what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine.
Yes, but we also do have separate coffee makers. We have separate French presses.
That's true. We do.
We just have recently been doing pour over, but very much of like, because the other thing is like, if this is my thing, I don't have to worry about being too delicate because we share it,
Hmm.
right? I I am particular. I am a high maintenance prissy bitch, and I understand that with like my books and things like I don't bend the spines of my books. I don't highlight. I don't fold the pages. That is just blasphemy for me personally. You like a worn, like used
Yeah.
looking book.
Used books need love too. And I definitely do write in the margins sometimes, depending on the book.
Absolutely not. And it's just easier rather than you trying to tiptoe around
Hmm.
my books or me pulling my fucking hair out because you have damaged, in my mind, damaged air quotes, a book.
Hmm.
It's just easier of like, oh, this is a really good book. Cool. I'll buy my own copy and I will treat it how I want.
Hmm.
And like now we don't have separate shelves the same way in the fridge, but we did because initially So like now, neither of us can do
Mhm.
gluten. You also can't do dairy, which like medically, not just because we watched a fucking documentary or some shit. But like before, you didn't know that.
Correct. I
You
thought I had a normal diet and could eat whatever I wanted.
you
Very much
couldn't.
not.
Yeah, you couldn't. You just had a lot of mysterious medical issues. So we had separate shelves
Hmm.
to avoid like cross contamination thing. Like
Yep.
these are the, here's my shelf with like crackers, like, glutinous crackers. Here's my shelf with whatever, right? And then there for a minute when we realized you couldn't have gluten or dairy, then I would have almost like a separate like dairy shelf,
Hmm.
right? But then just over time, it just got easier to be like, I personally, for your own well-being, but also my own mental well-being of being constantly worried that I'm going to like contaminate something, I just quit carrying dairy in the house too, right?
Yeah.
But we still have separate shelves for like pop and
Yeah, because like
even.
we'll buy a case, but so that we don't have to think, well, okay, I had four, so that means I have two left, and you only had three, so that means you have three left. Like you have your shelf for your pop, and I have my shelf for mine, so that I could just reach in and like, oh, I got two left.
I think your mom like literally cried or something.
I think it's that skewed relationship script, right? Because like my mom comes from a generation where like you're like every like you just share things when you're in a relationship with someone. Like that goes back to the what's yours is mine kind of premise. But I remember like she was concerned at the beginning of our relationship that we had separate things, that we didn't share a bank account, and we still don't. Like we still have separate bank accounts so that we don't have to think about spending the other person's money and keeping everything like fully at the front of our minds. Like the money that you earned is the money that you earned. And obviously you spend it on us and on me, but we don't pull it into a joint account. And like we buy groceries separately. We still split the cost of groceries, but we buy them separately. And she was concerned at the beginning. She thought that our relationship was like not committed because we weren't sharing things.
Yeah, and again, like that script, right? And if if we had kids, it might be a separate
Hmm.
issue. If obviously like marriage and things, like there are certain like again practical aspects to a single joint account, but then also having separate accounts too. But just currently with the current iteration of our relationship, it isn't a necessity, right? We split rent, we split groceries. It because like some of my friends, they'll be like, oh, my wife or my partner, they saw this on in our joint bank account. Like they checked the records and they saw that I bought this thing, and then they brought it up. Like, why did you buy it? Like, why did you do this? And just like, not that we would do that with each other because one, we fucking trust each other, but that kind of like just pain in the ass of like I have to answer for my own purchases I made with my own money.
Hmm.
And that's just, I think that is part of like the relationship script a lot of people have. And it just seems to me personally to be toxic and a thing that causes friction and arguments that doesn't need to.
Yeah. All right. The fourth one is that we show each other unconditional support. It's kind of like we always have if that's what you want to do, we'll figure it out kind of mentality. Like we never pressure each other to stay in a job that we don't want. We never really push each other to make a decision that we think is best. It's just, we'll figure it out.
Very much. Like, I think, financial pressure is one of the probably most common things people argue about, like
Mm-hmm.
statistically, right? And obviously, like, we've we've had our fair share of financial insecurity and things
Yeah.
between like my own journey of when I was practicing therapy, and then I got fired because of like COVID layoffs and things, and then
Me
you
being
know
a broke grad student for the last however many years.
yeah, and then me going into entrepreneurship and like trying to figure that out without business training, and entrepreneurship itself is very it's an emotional roller coaster and things, but neither of us ever looked at the other and was like, you need to get a real job, you need to be the rock of this
Mm-hmm.
relationship and have a stable like a salary and like health benefits and things. And like the big caveat to this is like if we had a real medical issue that necessitated insurance, or if we had something like after I got fired, like if I had had like type 1 diabetes or some shit, obviously
Like
I
an
would have.
ongoing chronic thing. Yeah,
Correct. Like that is a caveat, right? Like
for
there are
sure.
some people who have like legit things like you absolutely have to make certain, especially in the US, you have to make certain sacrifices for that type of stability,
Hmm.
for the health insurance things, right? We were fortunate enough that when we've had all the financial insecurity we've had, we haven't had a thing like that. Okay. But I also know plenty of people who don't have those real issues who still put so much pressure and blame their partner, right? Because it's
Hmm.
like, I have an expectation of you. And when you don't live up to that expectation, whether that expectation is realistic or unrealistic is irrelevant. When you don't meet my expectations, I get pissy.
Yeah, and that's such a problematic mindset. It's like I might see your potential and like how far you could go in a certain field. I'm never going to tell you you can't follow your passions just because I think you should be doing something differently.
Well, I think, like, again, this relationship script thing, I think it's just like the woman's job, air quotes, is to nag.
Hmm.
And like that's what we see in all like the rom-coms and all the sitcom depictions and shit. Like the guy's like this blubbering oaf who is often the breadwinner, and then the woman just nags him constantly to be the breadwinner, to be stable, to do better, be better, whatever, right? And all that does is breed resentment and
Hmm.
compartmentalization. Meaning, on a good day, you can compartmentalize of like, okay, they mean well, but they irritate the shit out of me because they're constantly bitching at me and nagging at me to do different, to basically live up to their expectations of me, not my own expectations of myself, right? And then on not a good day, and some people, some of my friends and things, they're really good at compartmentalizing of like, I know they mean well, this is very irritating, however, let me just kind of put my own feelings in a box and just do what they say. Well, then it's like your partner becomes almost like this parent to you,
Hmm.
like they're nagging
Yep.
you, they're parenting you, and that's just a weird fucking dynamic. I'm not a psychoanalytic psychologist by far, but there's definitely some Freudian shit there. But like that's part of the dynamic. And I personally hate being micromanaged.
Hmm.
And we've both been in past relationships where like there was definitely like an element of coercion and management and things. And it's just like, if I have to go, especially if you have like a regular job, like I got to go to a regular job, be managed all day, then I got to come home and be managed too. Like fuck all that, right? So I think that like that is an issue for a lot of people. And then whether or not you're good at compartmentalizing, that breeds a lot of resentment,
Hmm.
because it's just like when you are nagging me and telling me these things, you are also saying you don't really respect the current reality of who I am,
Hmm.
and you're not supporting who I am or what I want, because you are placing your own wants and
Yeah.
expectations above my own. And there's no cooperation, there's no collaboration. It's very much a we do it your way or I have to bear the repercussions.
Yeah. So by us not putting that pressure on each other and not nagging each other about those things, it also like removes a lot of fear and anxiety. So like when I made the decision, like I spent 5 or however many years in grad school, getting masters and getting PhD, and had the plan of being a faculty member, doing research, going the traditional route of what you do when you get a PhD. The day I decided that that's actually not what I wanted to do, and I wanted to do the more entrepreneur creator route. Now, granted, you had already started down that route, so it made it a little bit like easier or whatever, but I never had any fear or anxiety about your reaction to me wanting to do that. Like going down, like completely changing paths is already scary enough that we don't need that added fear and anxiety from each other. Like going down a path that I'm not familiar with was already like unknown and unfamiliar and scary, but I never had any fear or worry that you were going to tell me it was a bad idea or that I wasn't going to be good enough to do it. Like I just came home and I said, I don't want to go into academia anymore. And you're like, okay, cool. We'll figure it out.
Well, and like I think unconditional support is a really good term for it, because like
Mm-hmm.
I think people have this idea of like unconditional love or unconditional whatever. It's like if we cheated on each other, that would be it.
Yeah.
Like that's
Love
like
done. Love done.
it's like, and it's like I can still care about you, but
Hmm.
it's like the relationship is irrevocably
Yeah.
fucked,
I can
right?
still love what we were, but
Correct. But and I think that that is what a lot of people think about, like unconditional love of like I just intrinsically whatever however they ever act, I just
Hmm.
accept. And it's like no, this isn't that. It is I unconditionally support your decisions. Right?
And your ability and authority to make decisions for yourself.
Yeah, assuming they don't like harm us or harm me,
Right.
like very
It's
much right.
always the caveat.
Yeah, and yeah, but it's very much a we have been in the thick of shit before of with stress or family stuff, money stuff, whatever. But it almost like one it reaffirms that we are very solid because
Hmm.
it's always like us against the problem.
For
It
sure.
is always I support you even if the path ahead is very uncertain. We will figure it out, right? And that has become like our mantra of like we'll figure it out.
Yep.
And it's very much a we will figure it out because as long as we are solid and we support each other, that that becomes the task of we will figure it out together rather than you need to figure it
Hmm.
out or this is your job, this is your responsibility to live up to my expectations. Like it is very much like we're a team and then together we will conquer whatever.
Yep. It's just like when, to pull some nerddom into this, it's just like when Jadzia Dax told Worf on their wedding, when if we join together, no force can stop us.
RIP. Yep, for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure.
For sure.
Still a TV death that I will never get over.
Yeah.
Right. Number 5 is that we don't fight ever. No, we don't argue. We don't bicker. I wouldn't call it bickering. I would say we both get irritable because of other things, not about the relationship. Or we're one of us is just in a bad mood, one of us is stressed, one of us is tired, whatever. But we never fight or argue.
We get pissy,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
that's
It's because
like
I'm hungry.
I would say it's because
9 times out of 10, it's because I'm hungry.
we're hungry, we're tired, or occasionally
I took something the wrong way,
I
but it's
was
just because I didn't think it through and what you're actually saying.
correct. Or like I just had a very like dickish delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And like one of the things that we've learned to be really helpful is, communication, right? Of either if I'm in a weird mood, I will come down and be like, hey, I'm going to try and self-soothe today. However, if I come across as especially dickish, one, I'm going to do everything I can to not. But if I do, understand this, it isn't a reflection of you. It is purely a me thing
Mm-hmm.
today. So just if I can just preemptively let you know that, that helps. Other times, I think I'm communicating clearly, but I am clearly fucking not. And then maybe you take it the wrong way, or maybe just my delivery was totally fucked.
Or you had half the conversation with yourself in your head before saying the other half. And
More often than not, yes, this is what's happening. But because of that, then you have a negative
mm-hmm.
reaction, and then that influences kind of how we interact for a second. But then every time it's just like, hey, I didn't like how you said that.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, it is never a you need to change. It is a I am communicating how I receive that
Yep.
so that we can now be on the same page. Because then I'm like, oh fuck, I didn't mean that. Like this is what I meant. When I said X, I meant Y.
Yep.
And then we come back to being on the same page, right? But like I'm never pissy at you
Mm-hmm.
specifically. We're never arguing or bickering about ourselves. It is typically one of us took it the wrong way or we didn't appropriately self-soothe. And then the like because sometimes, like you'll be pissy and I'll be like, when was the last time you ate? And then you get
A little
more
bit angry.
pissy.
Yeah, for like a hot second, I get even more mad.
You get more pissy, but then you're just like, you're right. Right? It's like you are the epitome of like a Snickers commercial
Oh,
sometimes.
yeah,
And
for
I can
sure.
be too, like 100%, right? This isn't a you thing. But and I think another thing is like we learned fairly early on how each of us self-soothes.
Oh,
Like
yeah. That was actually really hard for me to learn because I'm someone who like we're gonna sit here and we're gonna talk about the problem because otherwise it's just gonna eat at my insides. And you're very much a I need to go in a separate room by myself and not talk to anybody for a few hours and then I'll probably be fine or I'll be able to talk about it then. You are a leave me alone and let me self soothe. I'm a no, let's sit down right now, right here, and talk about it until it's not a problem anymore.
I will feel smothered and shut down, right? So I think us like again like talking about all of that early on of like when I'm upset, this is what I personally need. What do you need? So then we can be like, okay, well, I self-soothe this way, but that doesn't mean you do,
Hmm.
right? Like if you're upset and I leave you alone, sometimes that maybe you feel abandoned, or maybe you,
Abandoned, or like you don't actually care about it being an issue, when I know that's not the case. But in the moment when I'm emotionally heightened, I'm not going to think straight.
but in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm giving her what she needs because I'm giving her what I would need in the
Right.
same situation, right? So understanding what does your partner actually need, and for soothing, but also recognizing how am I coming across right now, that has really helped us avoid like actually fighting,
Hmm.
right? And having like, we don't raise our voices, we don't, like you said, like we don't bicker, we just don't. But I think another big part of that is we both own our emotions,
Oh,
like,
I know I'm a sensitive bitch sometimes.
but you also recognize your emotions are your responsibility
Hmm.
and not mine. Now, as just, a collaborative partner, I want to help you manage your emotions, but it is not my responsibility to manage your emotions.
Hmm.
And that is a key distinction, because I think in a lot of relationships, it's like, I am upset, therefore, it is your job to fix me being upset. And that is not how you do a healthy
Hmm.
relationship. Like, I am upset, therefore, it is my responsibility to be unupset. What you can do to aid me in that, to support me in that, is by giving me what I need, but the sole responsibility is on me.
Hmm. And I think I had that, again, flawed relationship script in the beginning, where like when I would get upset about something and you'd say, okay, I'm done. Like this conversation's not getting anywhere. So I'm going to stop the conversation because that's, practical. It makes sense. But again, in the moment when I'm emotionally heightened, you saying, okay, I'm done with this conversation meant you don't actually love me because you're not willing to fight for me and you're not willing to have this conversation with me, because of my past experiences and my past relationships, and just the flawed perspective I have about relationships. That's how I took it. But then, like, the more we actually communicated, the more I was like, oh no, he's right. Like, we're not having productive conversations in those moments. We're not effectively communicating our needs and our wants and our expectations and our boundaries. And so nothing is coming out of those.
That, but it's also like, I know where my line is, and I know that if we continue on the trajectory we've been on and we keep just this circular bullshit, eventually I'm going to get too irritated for, like, this is already unproductive, but it is going to actively become problematic that I'm then going to have to come back and like fix extra shit because I said something dickish, or something
Mhm.
happened. I'm just like, I'm done, because I'm communicating that if we continue to go down this path, I am going to effectively become dysregulated to a certain degree emotionally, and I don't want to show up like that in our relationship.
Mhm.
So this is what I need. I need a break so that I can calm down, and we can just both cool off. So then we can come back and address the problem together collaboratively, rather than getting in, crossing that line into, now we're just arguing with each other.
Yeah, and to say that we never fight is not to say that we always agree. There's a distinct difference, because there are some things that we don't agree on, but there's honestly not a lot that we don't agree on, because that's one of the things that, it was really important up front, is that we made sure that, like, on all of the, really important fundamental relationship things, we were on the same page, like, just the things that fundamentally break down relationships, we have the same stance on, we have the same beliefs on. And but there are some things that we don't agree on, but we don't attach that to each other's identity or like personality or whatever. And so we don't make it an argument and we don't turn it into a fight. We don't, like, we have conversations about it, and we, like, for lack of a better way to put it, like, defend our side and our standpoint.
We can get heated
We can get heated,
with a couple things.
but we don't fight about it. I
I
don't sit there and say you're wrong.
Well, but it's also like, I love you more than I care about being
For
right, in air
sure.
quotes, about whatever the fuck the opinion is or the issue is. It's just like, at the end of the day, okay, we don't agree on this. It fundamentally doesn't fucking matter relative to the importance of our relationship in my life. So it's just like, because especially shit like we can't change, right? Like
Hmm.
there are certain aspects of the world that like we don't necessarily agree on how to appropriately handle like the quote unquote solution for that problem. But at the end of the day, neither of us are in a position of power to really influence that problem.
Yeah,
So it's just like, well, it doesn't fucking matter. It's a fucking Facebook debate at
for
that
sure.
point, and I'm just like, I love you. Fuck this problem. It is irrelevant compared to us.
Number 6, we don't force each other to do activities just because we like them. So I'm not going to force you to do something that I know you don't really want to do or don't like to do just because I do. There's no like, oh, do it for me because you love me or do it for me because I'm your girlfriend or whatever. Like, if I have an activity that I want to do that I know you don't, like going swimming in a lake or whatever, I'm going to go do it by myself or with another friend. I'm not going to make you do it.
Yes, also I am highly oppositional, and it doesn't go well. And I am very like obstinate as well. Like my thing is like I try very hard to be very flexible with a lot of things. I try very hard to have very few like lines in the sand
Hmm.
because I know I can be like a stronger personality and shit like that. So like I try to modulate that, right? However, there are certain things that I'm like, I have spent a lot of time considering if this is worth upholding. So there are a couple lines where I'm like, this is a hard line. There's no wiggle room around it. And again, we'll get to this in another point, but like we communicated and agreed on what all those were, up front. But like guilt trips
Have
don't
no place in a relationship
they
ever.
don't help, right? And I know you've talked about like ultimatums and things like that before and some of your other content, but like again, that is a typical relationship script of I want to do something. You don't want to do something. So I have to coerce you. I have to emotionally manipulate you or try to reward you for good
Or
behavior.
bribe you.
Yeah, bribe you. Yeah. Or just guilt trip you into doing what I want to do. And it's like, you know, I don't do roller coasters. I am not a thrill seeker in any capacity with like physical things. Like you want to go skydiving.
I want to go
I
skydiving. I want to swim with sharks. Like I less so the older I get. Like I've become a lot more just like I'd rather just chill at home. But I'm very much a thrill seeker, and I understand that you are not. I'm never gonna like. We went to Dollywood, and you literally sat there and held my coat while I rode the roller coasters by myself, and I had a blast.
well,
But we still had an experience together. Like we still got to walk around the park together and like look at the decorations because I think it was like close to Christmas time or something
it
when
was
we went.
cold as
I don't
fuck.
remember. It was in November or something. But like we still had that shared experience. I just did the part of it that I like to do by myself.
That and like there's sometimes where it's like, okay, let's find a friend. So, because
Yeah.
like if there are times where like you want to go on a roller coaster with another person, it's like, okay, cool. That is never going to be me,
Hmm.
and there's no amount of guilt that's going to work. So let's find a friend for you to do
Yeah.
it. But a lot of times you are cool to do some of those things by yourself or with your own friend group,
Hmm.
right? And I think that it has been really helpful for us too. Is like these are things I want to do. I will invite you to do them with me, but I am not going to coerce you into doing them with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's a natural spring here in Austin. It's called Barton Springs and it's basically a public pool, but it's a natural spring. So there's like a natural rock bottom and everything and it's a wonderful cool, very cool place. But you don't really like swimming in outdoor spaces. You don't really like being outdoors a whole
Okay,
lot.
here's the thing. One, when I was a kid, I literally when I would get in trouble, my mom would be like, "Hey, you're grounded. Go outside and play." Like I'm not an outdoor kid. I maintain a healthy level of albino fluorescence because I just don't go outside. The other thing is I straight up can't fucking swim, right? Like can't swim. Growing up, my dad and I would go fishing in this like natural body of water, and there was like this line of like buoy line, and on one side it would be the swimming hole, and then on the other side would be the fishing area. We would catch like massive ass alligator snapping turtles in the fishing side. And I'm like, these fucking turtles don't read the sign of like, well, this is a swimming area. We can't go over here. I'm like, I'm not trying to lose a fucking toe, right? Like my dad, he's been like swimming in the river and shit, and like bluegills and like other fish will like come up and like almost ripped his nipples off before. Is like it's a whole thing. So I'm like, I don't fuck with shit like that. Like I just don't, right? I appreciate it for what it is, and I fully support you in
Mhm.
doing it. But if you want me to be the guy in the deep end in a pool when I'm gonna drown, or you want me to be like in the natural body where there's like snakes and lizards and turtles
Mhm.
and hooks and
Sharks in the ocean.
whatever in the fuck jellyfish. Yeah, I'm just not your guy.
Yeah, because I love the ocean and you've been to the beach with me. And I know you don't like getting sand on your feet, but you're there because we're on vacation and I want to go to the beach and you love me and you want me to be happy. So we go to the beach for a little bit. You take like 2 steps into the water and that's about it. I don't expect or try to make you do it any different.
Yeah, but again, like that, it comes down to respect and communication, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
respect my boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and the things that I do or don't want to do, and I respect that you do want to do those things, and I never try to hold you back, right? Like
For
I
sure.
never say like, "Hey, I don't want to do that," right? It's like, okay, I recognize you want to do it, and sometimes be like, "Do you want me to go?" And sometimes you'll be like, "Well, do you want to go?" I'm like, "That isn't the question. Like we both know I don't want to go, but I will go if you want me to. I will not fully participate, but I will go to show you support and to
Mm-hmm.
experience a part of it together."
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that is just, again, it kind of comes back to like self-soothing thing of like, and almost keeping things separate of, I fully support what you do and I want you to be happy. That just doesn't always involve me doing the exact thing with you.
Yeah. 7. We front loaded our baggage, our expectations, and our boundaries. And we've already like talked about this a little bit with a few of the other ones, but you know, when we both made the decision that like okay, we might want to start dating, we want to start hanging out with each other. One, we already kind of knew each other's past experiences just because we had like had these conversations before we even started dating when we were friends. But we legitimately, I remember we sat in your car and said, these are my hard lines. Like I had very hard boundaries because of past controlling and abusive relationships that I'd had. So like one of my boundaries was I will like you cannot tell me that I can't go do something or that I can't wear something or I can't do whatever. Like I just I can't have that in a relationship. And then if that is ever a thing that happens, I'm out the door, plain and simple. And like we laid out everything. Like I told you about my past relationships. I told you about my boundaries and I told you what I was and wasn't looking for in this relationship and you did the same. And that made it to where like we didn't have to dance around things. Like we knew right up front what we wanted, what we didn't want, what we were willing to put up with and what we weren't.
And like that worked really well for us because it's like right now we're friends and we're contemplating dating.
Like
If
this is back when we first
correct,
were figuring it out.
correct.
Yeah.
And it's very it was like basically here's like my one pager. Here's all the
Yeah.
good things about me. Here's all the things I'm willing to compromise on. Here are the things I'm not willing to compromise on. Here's the shit that's honestly it's a character flaw, and I just need you to know that going into it.
Like I'm gonna be working on it, but it might take me a while.
Yeah. So it was very much a take it or leave it in that we don't have any like sunk costs. So if you aren't willing to accept these, totally cool. We'll just keep being friends.
Yep.
But if you want to move forward, you can move forward fully knowing everything you're getting into. And it
Yep.
was like here are beliefs around religion or kids or career or future or like you said, like boundaries. Like it was here is everything because like I have seen too many times people get into a relationship and they're so caught up, and we referenced this in an earlier point, but like they get so caught up in the puppy dog like exciting phase that they don't consider like, well, there are fundamental spiritual or religious beliefs that are just going to conflict, or they don't conflict as long as we don't have kids, but they will conflict if we do have kids. It's like you need to figure that shit out before you have fucking kids. You need to figure that shit out before you get with that person for 5 or 10 years or 30 or like or a year or more. Like you have to understand these things before you get too far into it because that is if you don't, you end up getting to the point of like we've been together 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever, and there is a make or break aspect of this that we both feel we've been in this relationship too long to address. There isn't anything to address because neither of us want to compromise on it. So we either ignore it or let it fester and cause resentment. And then we eventually either are miserable or we break up anyway. And it's like, if you just front load all that shit, if there was like a fundamental thing that we were like, look, not only is this something I'm unwilling to compromise on, but it is a make or break for me personally. I want to know that before we start dating.
Otherwise, I'm
So
just wasting my time.
yeah, so that I can be like, nah, girl, like
We're not
you,
right for each other.
you're cool, but that's a line for me.
Yeah, and I think that's what people get so caught up in is like they're like, oh, well, I can't tell them about this because I'm afraid they won't take it well. It won't work out, and they won't want to date me. It's like, well, then they're not really dating you because they don't actually know you. They don't know what your experiences have been. They're not actually getting to know who you are as a person. And so your relationship is kind of fake
That, but like we both had baggage
for sure.
coming into like our relationship, right? And like we had baggage as like you were somebody who had. Did you do DV advocacy at that point, or was that after?
No, that was after we started
Okay,
dating.
but still like criminal justice stuff. You had a background
Yeah.
in CJ and psychology. I was at that point getting my master's in
Hmm.
psychology. I don't think I got into the doc program
No, not
yet.
yet.
Um, but I had been like studying sex and relationship therapy. So like I wanted, I knew a lot intellectually about healthy relationships, even though I had just gotten out of a hella toxic one. And likewise with you.
Hmm.
So like, despite the fact that we both intellectually understood a lot of the ins and outs of what makes up a healthy relationship, what makes up an unhealthy relationship, we both had just come out of incredibly toxic patterns that we both were like, look, I'm going to have some baggage for a minute that I'm actively working on, but for lack of a better term, like here are some like low key triggers.
Yeah.
Because like I remember, like for me, the last relationship I was in, like they were incredibly emotionally manipulative and dysregulated. So like I had to, I was coerced into constantly apologizing
Hmm.
for shit that like literally I didn't even do, to the point that like I would reflexively apologize and then get angry. So when we started dating, and I'd communicated that to you, but there are times where like early on in that relationship, something would happen and I would reflexively say I'm sorry and then get pissed off. And then you would be like, why are you apologizing? You don't like you have nothing to apologize for. And that was really helpful for me because I'm like, I just apologized and got pissed off. And this isn't the she's not the person.
Hmm.
Like I'm getting pissed off at my past, but then you would kind of like help correct that of like, hey, don't apologize. Like this isn't anything,
Hmm.
right? And then like we would have other issues where like or other circumstances where you would be like low key triggered and then
Yeah,
I would
because
help correct it.
again, one of my boundaries was like, I won't put up with you telling me what I can and can't do, who I can and can't hang out with, what I can and can't wear. And but there were several times that I was like, hey, can I go hang out with this friend? Hey, can I get this new shirt? And you'd be like, I don't fucking care. Go hang out. Yes, go hang out with your friends. Do it.
Or
Like,
like a haircut
yeah.
or hair dye. And I'm just like, I don't or like glasses. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Like I love you for you. Like I don't give a fuck. Like if you want to cut your hair, you want to get glasses, you want to get a clothes or go hang with people. I don't give a shit. Like just come back. Like and as long as like we're cool, like I don't give a shit.
Yeah. So it was like laying out our boundaries, but also helping each other. So it was a really, really helpful thing for us to just cards on the table. Here is me, make an informed decision. And that's what it boiled down to.
Yep.
8 is that we don't get sick of each other. We don't get bored of each other. We don't get tired of each other. We have spent 18 hours in a car, and we're just as happy with each other afterward.
So I think this kind of comes down to a lot of people are in relationships with people they're not compatible with.
Oh, yeah.
And like I've heard and both media depictions and like people I actually know, people talk about how like, if you have a regular job, you spend most of your day away from home, away from your partner, and that actually helps preserve the relationship because it's like when you're on vacation together, that's when you start to bicker a lot. Or a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to retire yet because I'm just going to be around the old lady all the time, the ball and chain.
Mm-hmm.
Or the wife is like, oh, I don't want him home all day long. Like we'd kill each other.
I
And
say,
it's like,
didn't the divorce rate during COVID like really spike because people like couples had to spend so much more time together than they were originally, and it just they realized it just didn't work.
and it's just it's so easy to distract yourself from the reality that you're not compatible with the person you're with, because it's like especially like again, regular job where you go into the office, like it's an 8 hour shift, but then you're on the road for 30 to
Hmm.
60 minutes one way. So you're spending 10 hours away from this person. You're spending 8-ish asleep.
Hmm.
Like you're really only with and if you go to a gym, you may only actually be spending time with the person you're with 4 to 6 hours a day.
Yeah, or less.
And it's really easy to be like, man, after I've been home for like 2 or 3 days, like I'm about ready to strangle this motherfucker. And it's like, why are you with him?
Yeah, like so many people like are like, oh, like how do you just handle such a long road trip? Like, don't you get tired? Don't you get bored? And it's like, no, we have kick ass conversations on our road trips, and we, rock out to really fun music playlists. We listen to audiobooks. We listen to podcasts. We have good conversations. We find fun snacks in the gas stations. Whatever. Like,
Or we do get bored, but we don't get irritated at each other.
yeah, we're
Like,
bored of the situation. We're
yeah,
not bored of each other. Yeah.
correct.
And I think that's a really big distinction that people struggle to see sometimes.
And another thing with that, like one, like we could just, we can have conversations and things. And that again was helped by the fact that we front loaded everything in that
Hmm.
relationship, and we do separate things so that we have new things to talk
Yeah.
about, but we also have shared hobbies like
Hmm.
jujitsu, D&D, some other things, so that we have this combination of like we can talk about jujitsu, we can talk about D&D, we can talk about some of the other things, but then we also have the separate things we do
Hmm.
that we can talk about. And then it's just like at the end of the day, like I like you, I like hanging out with you. You don't irritate me.
Mm-mm.
Like, and I think that so many some people I know, their partner is just delicate in one way or another. And it's like, well, there's this big aspect of my life that I can't really talk to my partner about because they wouldn't approve, or they, not even that like I'm keeping it a secret, but just like I can't really talk about it to them because they don't like that aspect of my life, or they disagree with me doing these things. And that just, it causes gaps in
Hmm.
connection. It
Gaps and friction.
Yeah.
Number nine is that we've never tried to change each other, but we expected each other to change. Like over time, we expected each other to grow and to change with different likes and dislikes and different career aspirations and things like that. Basically, like we supported growth, but we didn't force it or try to influence it.
Yeah, so like I think there's a big difference between supporting and coercing, right?
For sure.
Because one, you are under no obligation to live up to my expectations of you. We've touched on that before.
Hmm.
But it's also like I can see the potential you have, and or I can see that right now maybe you think you're on a path that's good for you, but maybe I have experience on that path and I'm like, she ain't gonna like that. Or I'm like, well, in 5 or 10 years, where would she be? Right. Like, so an example recently would be like academia,
Hmm.
right? I had at one point wanted to go into academia, and then I got very disillusioned with all the bullshit in academia and how gated and elitist a lot of the aspects of academia are. Um, and then I had left it despite the fact that I love teaching. And then you were considering heavily going into academia because one, that was really all you knew. And it seemed like a good route
Hmm.
because it's like, oh, I get paid to teach
And I
and
was good
learn,
at it.
and you're good at it. But I'm like, okay, but I know my reasons for leaving, and I know that she shares a lot of those values and beliefs. She's just sort of enmeshed in it right now. How can I? But and maybe she does choose to go into academia. Totally cool, as long as that makes her happy, even if it isn't what I would want to do or I think that she would be happiest doing. If she enjoys it, I don't give a fuck. I will fully support it. However, it was like, here's another route just to consider,
Hmm.
right? And that was when, like that was the time when I was going through entrepreneurship and I was, new into that. So you were seeing some of that. And then, you would talk about like, oh, I really want to do X, Y, or Z, but I can't do it in academia. Or, oh, Corey, you can work from anywhere in the world because you do remote. If I got a job at a university, we would have to move there and live there. And now a single job will dictate where we spend the next 30 years of our
Hmm.
lives. And it's just like over time, like slowly, you're like, I don't think that's what I want to do. And then, like, I hooked up with, or I met like Paul Millard, and then, his book, The Pathless Path. And I was like, hey, there's this really dope book by this super cool dude. You should read it.
Life changing book,
Yeah.
by the
Yeah. The
way.
Pathless Path by Paul Millard.
I'll link it in the description.
Um,
But I
it,
think it's like similar in like you kind of had to let me figure it out for myself. Like you couldn't tell me that it was a better idea. It's the same thing with jujitsu because like I started jujitsu back when we first started dating in 2014. And I did it for I think like 6 or 8 months, and then I quit because I didn't like it. But that was because I had like a lot of chronic pain issues going on and whatever else. But so I quit, and you knew that jujitsu is something that would have been good for me. I would have loved, and it was a great sport. But you knew that like you couldn't push me to go back. You had to let me make the decision to go back on my own, and that took like 5 years. Like I didn't go back until we moved to Kentucky and started going to Chewy's gym in 2020. But when I'd made the decision to go back on my own, I fell in love with it. And so like it's basically like you might have that idea like, oh well maybe like this over here would be a better option, or like she would like this more, but you gotta let me get there on my own.
well, it comes down to like having an idea of what
Yeah,
I think that you would really enjoy, but also recognizing what do you need to come to that conclusion on your
for
own.
sure.
And I mean, it's like avocado.
So many of my favorite foods. He's like, you should try this. And I'm like, ew, no, gross. But then later on, I try it. And I'm like, God, this is good.
Well, it's like I think she'll like this. Hey, do you want to try this?
Nope.
No, it's gross. So then it's almost like when you have like a baby deer or like a wild animal super skittish. I'm just like, okay, well, I'm going to have avocado over here. If you want to try it, you're more than welcome. And then I just keep doing that. And then eventually you're like, okay, fine, I'll just try it. It's okay. And then like
Three
another,
months later, it's my favorite food ever.
yeah, so many things. But it's one of those things where like, in one, I'm a little bit older and I'm a little bit further ahead in certain aspects of
I'm a little bit more outgoing and like
yeah,
willing to try new things. I'm a little bit, like you said, baby deer skittish when it
yes.
comes to change and new things.
So there are things where I like, one, I'm like, she's not going to want to do that, or she might like this. And other things where I'm like, I legitimately think, like, irrelevant of my own expectations or desires for you, I'm like, I legitimately think she would enjoy this. How can I help support her in experimenting and exploring this without it feeling or coming across as pressure, coercion, manipulation, anything like that? Because like it's from a place of genuine support of
Hmm.
like and sometimes there are things where you're just like, no, I don't like that, or I do want to do this. It's like totally cool. Then I fully support you doing that.
Yep.
Right? It's just knowing your partner, having an idea of what you feel they not you, but they would enjoy that would help their own growth, and supporting them as much as you can in a way that they are willing to accept.
But also, it's like we've been together for 10 years. We can't expect the other person or ourselves to be the same person we were 10 years ago. Like, naturally, as humans, we change, we adapt, we grow, whatever. And to expect someone to be exactly the same, like the same things, dislike the same things, want the same things as they did a decade ago is just completely unrealistic. Like I had such a sheltered life in some aspects because of past relationships and things, and I am nowhere near the same person I was 10 years ago. But you gave me that space to grow, to change, and we had a fundamental understanding that if at any point we started to grow and change apart, then we're not going to force the relationship. We're not going to try to change each other back to, oh, what we once were. We're going to allow the growth to continue separately.
But also, like, you were actively seeking growth.
For
What we,
sure.
we, we
Yeah.
both were and continue to be, right?
I was
So,
actively working on myself when we met.
so that was another thing of like, if we're both actively trying to grow on our own and trying to support the other one, then it's like when one of us comes across something that helped us grow and we think it helped the others, like, hey, here's the thing,
Mhm.
take it or leave it. I just want to show you and support you as much as I can, so that I'm giving you another opportunity to grow, and I you know actively invite you to do the same for me. Yeah.
Mhm. All right. Number 10, the last thing. And, we've kind of touched on this already a little bit occasionally on some of the other things, but we never speak negatively about each other, not to each other, not to our friends about each other. There's no venting about each other, nothing. Like, I don't have a single negative thing to say about you, whether it be to you or to my friends. And some people might be like, oh, that's unrealistic. Like, you're telling me there's not one thing that, gets under your skin about him. And it's like, no, because if there was, I would talk to him about it and I wouldn't frame it as a negative thing. But also, if there are negative things, like if I feel like I got to have a girls' night to vent about anything you've done or didn't do or whatever, then again, that's a fundamental problem in the relationship that needs worked on, that needs to be talked about. And if it's something that can't be fixed, then this relationship is just isn't going to work.
Yeah, like I just again, it's one of those like bullshit relationship scripts of you bitch about your partner,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh, I got to bitch about my old lady. Oh, my boyfriend or my husband, he's such a slob or he's whatever. It's just like address it with them. One, because if I'm bitching to my friends, it means I'm not talking to you about it.
And the problem's never going to get solved.
Correct. But then like another sort of a cognitive reframe that we do a lot is like, my brain wiring is a little different. So, there are many times we'll be talking and I'll be making fucking eye contact with you. And you'll say something and I'll just be like, what? It's like I wasn't listening. Make just dead ass eye
And
contact
I
and just not.
will honestly say it drove me nuts at first. But one, learn to adapt. I'm like, all right, the fact is that he didn't take in what I just said. So I can either angrily repeat it and, cause a tiff between us, or I can just repeat it because like me getting angry doesn't change that happened. And I think another thing is like kind of like in another point where you said like at the end of the day, like I love you, I want to be with you. And so just keeping in the front of my head like what is actually important. Like again, sometimes you get a little bit distracted when you're doing dishes, so dishes will have to get done, or you'll leave something out on the counter because you got distracted over here and so a task only got half done. And then I come into the kitchen and I'm like, why is there shit everywhere? What is happening? And is it more important for the kitchen counter to be clean, or is it more important for me to point out that I'm upset that the kitchen counter isn't clean? No, it's that's not important. So I'm just going to finish the task myself. If it's important to me, I'm not going to expect you to change.
Well, one, we've both chosen to reframe certain things as endearing.
It's also
Quirks is
funny.
endearing.
Like I find it funny sometimes.
We've learned to just reframe certain quirks as endearing, but it's also like there earlier on there were times where like I would be like, oh, I'm going to clean the kitchen and like help. And then I would do a bunch of things, but then there would be like one or two things that I got distracted on and I didn't finish, like did all the dishes, but the countertops were still dirty. And then you would come in and you'd be like, hey, you didn't clean the countertops. And I'm just like, I feel completely invalidated because I tried, I put in effort to do this thing, and all you found was the single problem. And that completely invalidated all of my effort.
Mm-hmm.
And we started to talk about that because it's like I cleaned, you point out a problem, and then I got pissy, and then you got pissy, and then it was just like, well, hold on, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like we both thought we were doing right because you were like, hey, you missed one thing. I'm trying to help you complete this task, and I'm like, but I did the task,
Yeah.
right? So then we really started to communicate more of I felt invalidated when you did this, and you were like, oh, I didn't mean to. I appreciate what you did. And then that informed how we showed up next time. So one, I'm trying to actually complete everything, although I frequently don't. And then you're like, thank you for doing
Yeah,
this.
I'll clean the counters.
I'm just gonna
But
clean the
like,
counter.
if I would have instead went to my friends and been like, he left the countertops a mess again, then, or he didn't put the toilet seat down again, like that's not going to fix the problem. And so, and it's not even a problem because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. Like it fundamentally doesn't matter if you left the toilet seat up or if the counters didn't get cleaned or if I didn't, pick up my clothes off the floor. Like those things just don't matter. And so rather than like venting to your friends and not solving the problem, just again, it all boils down to just communicate with each other and communicating effectively.
I think also it's like about keeping score. Like
Mm-hmm.
we don't keep score, right?
No.
I think like, and I think we've all been in this situation where something happens with a partner, with a friend, or whatever, and you immediately think, I can't wait to tell somebody about this. I can't wait to bitch about this, or
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm keeping score to either bring it up in an argument in the future, or I'm like, oh, I have to vent to my friends about this later. And keeping score is a solid strategy to fuck up your relationship. We fundamentally like even like earlier on when like I like you were just a broke grad student, you didn't have any money, and like I had a job and like I was covering more of the bills and
Mm-hmm.
things. And then it was just like I'm not keeping a tab, I'm not keeping score,
Yeah,
I'm
because there
not.
was a time where like I was unemployed because I had quit the job that we both had because it was just a terrible job that was just completely destroying my mental and physical health. So I quit on a whim and didn't have a backup, and that left you with the financial responsibilities.
And then, but then I think there was another time where like was struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're like, "Hey, I have more money. Let me
Yep.
cover more." And it's just like there was never a tally, there was never a score, there was never anything like that. And I think that really really helped because like we don't we're not looking for ammo. We're
No.
not looking to keep score, to bring up, to bitch about, to complain about to each other, to our friends, to anybody else. And that really really helps. And like when I feel again like this sense of psychological safety, when I feel like you're not keeping score, or when I'm not afraid like, oh, as soon as she walks away, I know she's going to be thinking about telling her friends, or like, oh, is she going to tell her friends about this thing, right? The fact that I never have to worry about that allows me to fully show up and sort of embrace vulnerability and
Mm-hmm.
and be more authentic and honest, because I'm like, she's not going to use this against me, she's not going to use this as ammo. So it's like, sometimes when we're having conversations and I just fucking zone out, right? And for me, like, I joke about this, but like, it isn't zoning out so much as like I zone in. Like, zoned out is my default. I'm just a highly distractible person. I'm always thinking about something else and five things at the same time, typically.
You get a very specific face. Like if I'm telling you something and I see this very specific facial expression, I just stop talking because I know you're not actually listening. And then I just wait for you to be done, whatever you're doing, so that you can come back.
Yeah. And I don't mean anything by it. It's just how I'm wired. But like, I feel much more comfortable just being like, to just tell you that, right? Of like, hey, I
Mm-hmm.
was in no way paying attention, because I don't feel like you're going to judge me. Whereas like historically, I would just try to wing it and use context clues of like, what the fuck did you just say? Let me and because like again, wiring, like you get pretty good at like using context clues
Mm-hmm.
of like, this is what they said, I'm assuming, and I can just kind of play it off. But like with us, I'm just like, I in no way was paying attention. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
What did you say? And then we just move on. And it the fact that I don't feel judged and I feel respected, and we constantly communicate and we work as a team, that just makes everything else so much easier and more fun.
Yeah. The through line of, I'm pretty sure all 10 of these is just effective communication because there's a difference between both people communicating. Like you can think you have great communication and that you're telling your partner all of the important things, but effective communication is really where it's at because like you got to make sure like it's a two-sided thing, like communication and comprehension. I have to not only communicate well, but I have to make sure that I'm communicating in a way that you're going to be able to comprehend
And respect.
and respect.
Because I can communicate things, but if I just don't respect you,
For sure.
then I'm just communicating as an asshole. So, like, communication and respect are the foundations for any kind of healthy relationship, whether it is romantic,
Mm-hmm.
platonic, whatever. Communication and respect, for sure. For sure.
Any last minute thoughts?
I love you and you're awesome.
I love
That's
you
it.
and you're awesome.
That's it.